Hello and welcome to the Church Development presentation on Stewardship, a Disciple's Response, the USCCB Pastoral Letter on Stewardship. It was created in 1992 to guide those of us in the stewardship world, both theologically and pragmatically. And even today, so many years later, it is a fantastic resource. Now, today's presentation is meant to equip you, a leader in your parish, not just with those theological underpinnings, but with up-to-date research and practical hands-on tools in which you can implement the principles that have been outlined in the bishop's letter. Now, I myself, as I reread it on a regular basis, I'm just sort of astonished by the insight and wisdom that was distilled, that was gathered together to present this document to guide the rest of us who are in the field. I kind of feel like parts of it were divinely inspired. So I enjoy being in the stewardship world, and I enjoy this document, and we're going to zip through it very fast. We're going to cover the content and the latest research and tips and tools that you can use to improve stewardship either in your diocese or in your parish. Now, I welcome you to ask questions on that chat bar, or you can text me. My number is 816-560-3641, and I will respond as we go forward. So buckle in and hang on. We are going to move really fast. The outline of what we're going to do today, we're going to walk through each section of the letter. We're going to present you with an overview so you know what's in there, and I do recommend that you buy a copy. It's not very expensive, and you'll refer to it a lot just to have it on your desk in your stack of books. It's just a great resource. We'll cover a summary of the content. We'll cover the latest research. We'll cover practical tips, and I'll tell you some case studies as well. From the parishes that we've worked with, as well as from my own personal spiritual journey, how I have come to understand and embrace these concepts. And we'll conclude with some questions for discussion. You could use this, we're recording this presentation, you could use this as a stewardship committee, get to know you, think through our plan, guide. And there are some wonderful reflection questions in the document, and I've just pulled out 2 or 3 for each chapter, because I like them. There might be other questions that you enjoy that you could tackle as well. So hang on, here we go. First question is, why the heck did the bishops create this document? They may not have had the resources that we have today, but there's a lot of data out there on giving. A lot of people don't know it's over a $300 billion economic powerhouse in our country today, and 40% of those funds go towards churches. Now, we Catholics are about half of the church-going population. So the economics of this, what we're about to talk about here, are enormous. And the problem is most people don't get stewardship. It's crazy. The average Catholic gives just 1.2% of their income. Only 5% of us actually tithe. Now, for context, the Protestant average is 2.2% or greater, but that's just the overall average. Now, if you look at the circle chart on your right, out of all churches, only half of all of us do an annual stewardship campaign. Only about 1 in 5 have a stewardship committee. If a church has a committee, it usually ends up being a finance committee that tackles stewardship 1 month out of the year. A very small part teach stewardship regularly, and less than 1% have what I would call a culture of stewardship. They don't talk about it, they don't have activities, and they don't even have it in the budgets. So, the ICSC, the International Catholic Stewardship Council, recommends that we devote 2% of our parish budgets to stewardship. Now, to compare that in the secular world, if you're running a nonprofit like a museum or a school or a YMCA, the ratio there is to spend $1 to raise $4 in an annual campaign. So we are much more efficient than our secular counterparts. And yet still we can't get hardly anybody to invest in stewardship. That's kind of my challenge. Of those who do get it, that small percentage, 5% of the population who do get it, tend to kind of correspond with that, the invitation by the bishops to give 5% of your income to your church, 1% to your diocese, and 4% to other charities. That's kind of a norm, and I kind of like it. I think it's a good idea. Of those dioceses who do a good job, and I love the Wichita Diocese. We've got a 20-year longitudinal studies of what happened when a diocese actually devotes some time and energy to stewardship. Their average giving goes up to 2.4% of income. And the caveat there is unless a parish has a school, and then the average giving is 4%. So they are approaching that ideal level. So it's just proof. Somebody has done it, and therefore you can do it. Now, in my opinion, the cornerstone problem, the big challenge, and the bishops recognize it, is that most people forget that everything that we have comes to us as a gift from God. Now, we have wonderful scripture that guides us from 1 Peter 4:10 that basically is there to remind us everything that we have comes from God. So it's up to us to figure it out and then use it to be God's boots on the ground. I love 1 Peter 4:10. It's just very eloquent. Now, what's not in the letter is telling, but nor would I have expected it to be there. They don't have the data collection systems that we have today. That was 92, today 2019. They didn't know the impact of things like involvement in decision-making. I really like Zeck's book, Why Catholics Don't Give. He pointed out we are not as generous as other denominations because of these things. We're not very included in decision-making. We can change that. We're not connected socially. We don't work at connecting people socially. We can change that. And our involvement as volunteers is modest, and we can change that. It just takes a little bit of effort. Okay? The bishop's letter did not instruct us on how to do this, but modern technology and data collection has provided us with both systems and metrics, ways to go about doing this that has a direct impact on people's ability to grasp stewardship and then to implement stewardship. Now, the process for prayer and discernment is just offered as a guide, but we now have to create tools and systems to make that happen. We have to really improve the way we ask people. I remember my father telling me in the back of his church as a child, they used to put up a big board that posted how much people gave, and that would be humiliating for everyone. So you can't exert pressure like that today, or people will flee the church. Another interesting thing is, in here there is a quote from Pope Benedict back when he was a bishop, and he really suggested that we really deploy lay leaders as our best storytellers. And statistically, guess what? That really is the best way. So we've got tools, techniques, and guidelines to make that happen. Now, one thing they could never have foreseen is the technological impact of ways to ask on giving. So we'll touch on it just briefly today, but you as a stewardship professional have really got to get into text to give. You have to make giving possible through your website. You have to deploy apps like Venmo. You need a dip jar, and you need a kiosk. I remember years ago being in the cathedral in San Francisco, and on my way out was an old cathode ray tube computer with a Visa slider. It was the first one I saw in a church, and of course I had to do it just to see what it was like. But at this point, all of us need an iPad. On the way out, people can swipe and make a donation. We also need a dip jar at the device just as big as a Coke can, where you can dip and make an automatic $20 gift. And that is the national average. So you set it up for a preset amount. It takes 1 second to take a donation. It costs about $400, but you make that back immediately. Now, as you can tell, I'm a nerd about this. I get very excited. I do a lot of reading and a lot of researching, but there's a reason for this. And I'll tell you just quickly my motivation that started in 1979. My first job out of college was working for the American Embassy in Kinshasa, Zaire. And I had a week off. I took a 5-day float trip down the Congo River with 2 of my buddies. And we set up our tents just north of the mouth of the river. It's a gigantic river. And I decided to go for a walk. Unfortunately, I walked into Angola. A small province named Cabinda is separated from the body of Angola by the river. And I walked into a war zone. They were attempting to secede from Angola. and the government of Angola had sent in Cuban mercenaries. We didn't know a war was going on. I walked right into the middle of it. I ended up with a gun to my head and people screaming at me. I thought I was going to be executed at the ripe old age of 22. So it was the first time I ever really prayed and meant it. And you would expect from a 22-year-old reprobate, the prayer would be, "Dear God, if you get me out of this, I promise I'll be good." But instead what came out was, "Dear God, into your hands I commend my soul." I was convinced I was going to die. Well, the prayer took. And my life started changing right at the moment of that prayer. They didn't kill me, obviously, but that did cause a change in my life. I began to become aware of that basic stewardship lesson because I was in overtime. I was almost executed right there. And from there on out, I became aware that every moment, every breath is a gift, and I need to do something with that. I need to pay it forward. So that was a key life lesson for me. So shortly after that, I got into this work, and I worked for a group for 10 years that didn't serve churches. I wanted to combine my faith and my professional expertise. So in 1992, I started church development to help churches in the area of stewardship. Stewardship is our passion. That's where we do research and publications, and we give away our stewardship material. The way we make money is to do capital campaigns, and we've helped more than 200 churches and dioceses and charities do capital campaigns. We've raised a couple $100 million, and we've raised a lot more than that in annual stewardship giving, and it has been a pleasure. Our vision is that people get the idea of stewardship. If you get it, you live a more fulfilling life. We know that. Now, the USCCB letter on stewardship is broken down into these 5 parts and these 3 appendix, and we're going to touch on every one. The call, Jesus' way, living as a steward, stewards of the church, which in my opinion is the most important thing we'll talk about today, and then the Christian way of life. In Appendix 1, we'll give you a quick summary. In Appendix 2, we'll give you stewardship and development resources and some ideas about goals, metrics, and methods. And then number 3, we'll cover the resources that are available. In Section 1, the call, it really talks about what's going on inside of us. In my opinion, after discipleship, making a deliberate decision to become a disciple of Jesus Christ, after that, your next most important milestone in one's evolution is that of being a steward. Everyone who listens to these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who has built his house on rock. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew and buffeted the house, but it did not collapse. It had been set solidly on rock. And of course, the contrast is building your house on sand. So discipleship and stewardship are the core values that undergird a fulfilling life, and one is therefore not buffeted about by the winds of common culture or the winds of change. In chapter 1, it covers these 4 points: the disciple's vocation, and I like to think of it as a vocation. It is a way of living a life. It covers responding to the call, which basically addresses what happens next. How do I act? What do I do? Real concrete things like giving, volunteering, and prayer. The call to stewardship really addresses how we as leaders could kind of facilitate people addressing this question in their own life. And then the cost of discipleship. I'm a big fan of Bonhoeffer, and it does have a cost. It is a challenge. It takes some courage. Anything worthwhile does, but the benefits are enormous. Now, the call as a decision comes at different times in people's lives. At mine, it came, with a gun to my head. But the call as a decision, in this section, they talk through, how one might receive that call. Could be through a good sermon or through a class or through role models or being involved. Or, believe it or not, a financial workshop seems to be a critical experience for a lot of people. We got some research from Dave Ramsey, who discovered that the average person, after going through that class, increases their giving to their church by a factor of 3. That's 300%. Isn't that incredible? So if that's all you knew and you wanted to serve people on their discipleship journey, that would be an easy thing to do. You could offer that class every spring and every fall in your parish, and that some people would get it. They would benefit from that. Grace is not cheap. It takes some effort. We need models to imitate. Now, we'll talk about that again when we talk about volunteer lay speakers. Now, this is the key insight. Everything that I have is a gift from God, and it's up to me to share it for the sake of the kingdom of God. Now, we can kind of measure the potential for the call. Gallup Polling created this measurement tool called the ME25. Thousands of parishes have been analyzed, and what they discovered that only about 15% of us are highly involved. About 50% are ready and open to being more deeply involved, and then the remaining 35% are CEOs. My wife calls them Christmas and Easter only, so we don't see a whole lot of them. Matthew Kelly is a little bit more skeptical. His assessment is less based on metrics and more anecdotally on his deep and wide experience in Catholic churches. But he thinks it's only about 6%. So if we know this is the lay of the land, our question is, how can we increase the size of that core, the core of committed people? The one way, as I mentioned a moment ago, conduct a financial management workshop to facilitate that discernment process. Now, becoming aware that God has blessed you with everything, that alone is a good question for a sermon, and it's a good source for stories. Now, my favorite story in my own life about how God has blessed me, the time I met my wife, Jenny. I bought a T-shirt from her in the Redemptorist Senior Center annual putt-putt golf tournament charity fundraiser. She was a volunteer, and I was a miserable golfer, but everybody can enjoy putt-putt. And I bought a T-shirt, and I bought a raffle ticket as well. She was such a charming person. I kept the raffle ticket and the T-shirt because she was so charming. Well, 2 days later, I was in her pastor's office, and she came by, and he introduced us, and we said at the same time, I think we met yesterday or the day before. Well, I bumped into her once a week after that for 6 weeks. Being slow on the uptake took me 9 months to ask her out. And we've been dating for 3 months. She introduced me to her brother, and her brother said, I remember you from Ward Parkway Pool when we were growing up. As a matter of fact, I remember when Jenny was 6 and you were a teenager. And Jenny was on the high dive, and I was yelling at her, Jenny, get down off the high dive, you're too little. So as she turned to come down, she slipped and fell face first towards the concrete. And he pointed at me and he said, as you put your hands on the ladder to go up the high dive, you caught her. It was a stony, cold, sweaty palmed silence, and Jenny looked at me and she said, that was you? And I turned to her. I remembered it as well. I said, that was you? And her brother said, he pointed at Jenny, he said, you know, that was him. He saved your life. You owe him your life. And I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe she'll say yes when I ask her to marry me. But that was one of those hand of God moments where that's the closest thing to a miracle in my life. And when miracles happen, you just got to ask yourself, where was God in this? And what is my relationship with God? And now I'm happily married now for decades. Every day I thank God for that wonderful woman that I caught that day. Now, when you turn to discuss this with your group, my 2 favorite questions that are listed at the back of this chapter, why do people hesitate? Why do people not leap into opportunities to do God's will and make the world a better place? That's a really good question to ponder, because that kind of equips us for the tactics that we'll employ. How do people get it? How do they move from I don't get it to I get it? That's a big step in life. But for you and your parish, processing that and really equip you for tactics that you can employ. Now let's shift to chapter 2, Jesus' way. I really like that prayer, not my will but thine, O Lord. That's kind of the first step. I've got to let go of my ego before I do that. In chapter 2, in these pages, they cover the example of Jesus, the image of the steward, and the role of steward within a parish, so being a steward of stewardship. I like St. Ignatius of Loyola. I like the daily discernment process. I like those 2 questions to contemplate upon at the end of the day. But he admonishes us, begin with getting rid of his distractions and then shift to discerning God's will. It's very interesting. We got to study. We got to hold Commerce Bank's church loans where those capital campaigns were run with a secular orientation, no prayer. They raised about 1.5 times annual giving in their capital campaign. We compared that to our pool of similar churches where prayer was the focus. The difference was astonishing. Prayer-based capital campaigns raised 2.5 times annual giving. Now you compare that to the 1.5 of the secular pure fundraising approach, and all of a sudden, oh my goodness, we can actually quantify the impact of prayer on generosity. Isn't that interesting? I love for nerdly stuff like that. Okay, I got a question through our just texted to me from Father Don. Thank you for joining us, Father Don. The question is, how can I share this with my volunteers to equip them? Well, thanks for asking that. Now, we're recording this, and we will make this available when this is done. So you could show this. It'll be about a 45-minute presentation. You can show it, you can pause it, and then you can work through the questions as well. Thank you, and keep the questions going. I see we got a couple more. Let me pause. Let me go through a couple more slides before I tackle the next one. I love David Brooks. I love this quote from David Brooks' book, The Second Mountain, and it really kind of recontextualized the way I think about giving, and I think this is worth sharing, and it's really the last sentence that makes the most difference. It is the elemental desire to transform isolation and self-centeredness into connectedness and caring. A personality awakens itself by how it gives. I love that. You know, he's also a fan of Bonhoeffer. So if we can take someone who was that brilliant from so long ago, who had such an enormous impact, and translate it into today, what then is our job of being a steward of stewardship? I think it is to present opportunities so that people can extend themselves, to transform themselves by giving. I think we are not just a servant of God, but we are a servant of human beings as well. We are serving them on their journey. Now, there's a bunch of research on people who are generous. I love this book by Gregory Lawson, Give to Live. One of his studies illustrated how people who are generous have a higher level of T cell production in their immune system. We can measure that. Isn't that fascinating? Now, we can't measure their relationship with God. They report being subjectively closer to God. We can't measure a distance. We can't get out a tape measure to see how close a person is to God. But that's what they have a sense of. We can measure their endorphin levels, and we know that increases with every act of generosity. Now, there are 2 other researchers beyond Lawson that give us a lot of insight into this. One guy named Seligman, he wrote a book called Flourish. It's really the underpinnings of a joyful life. You know, it's an extension of happiness, an extension self-actualization, but much deeper. And Flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And these 2 last research, they basically discovered that when people are in the midst of a generous life, they're connected with their values and all of humanity. The Buddhists have a word for this, samadhi, that being the interconnectedness of all life, where time and space and stress dissolve, and we have that peak experience of self-actualization. So again, what is our job as being the stewards of stewardship? I think it is to facilitate that, to open doors and present opportunities where our parishioners can have that life-changing experience. Now, in the Jesus Way discussion, I think it'd be fun to kick around with a committee. What are the characteristics of a steward here in our parish? Who are they and how do they act? What do they do? What is our favorite stewardship parable? Everybody's got a different one. And what can a steward expect? So since I've been in this business 30-something years, these tithers tend to self-identify to me, and they all have the same story. It's fascinating. They look for things to give to, things to volunteer for, and then they're quick to say, God has blessed me inordinately, and God will continue to bless me. So I'm looking to further my relationship with God. These people are living saints. I love it. The third chapter is titled Living as a Steward, and I think I can summarize it by saying it's collaborating with God. The key points that they cover in chapter 3, creation and stewardship, collaborators in creation, it's really a creative thing, redemption and stewardship, and cooperation in redemption. Who is a Christian steward? They receive God's gifts, they cherish them, they tend for them, they share for them. Key word here, justice and love, and return them. Now, this is an important thing that we publicize: weekly newsletters, weekly bulletin, monthly newsletters, sermons, lay speakers. Okay? I like this microeconomic view, and I think we need to publicize it so that people have a metric as they ruminate on how much should I give. In Zek's book, Why Catholics Don't Give, and his corresponding book, Best Practices in Parish Stewardship, really leans heavily on the percentage giving rather than the old formula of the dollar amount giving. It gives everyone a sense of an equal yoke, not an equal amount, but really an equal way of conceiving of their giving. Now, the 5%, 1%, 4%, we know about that. In addition, the idea of volunteering 10% of your work time is critical. Now, this micro view also includes a psychological quality of being fearless, brave, courage, taking a step out. I'm going to do something with nothing, no expectation of anything, and I don't know how it's going to go. That does take courage. That's one of the 4 cardinal virtues, which we'll talk more about later. But that courage to step out and to seek God's will is unusual. Now, I saw this in my daughter, my teenage daughter, not long ago. We were out camping, and as we came back into the campground where there are these public restrooms, I was going in the men's, she was going in the ladies, and as she pushed the door open to enter the ladies' room, a little green snake crawled over the toe of her boot and entered the bathroom. I about had a heart attack. And as I'm gasping, I say, well, Kellyanne, would you like to use this bathroom? There's nobody there, and I'd happily stand guard because a snake just went in there. And she looked at me, as teenagers tend to do to their parents, with the eye roll and said, Dad, it's just a snake. I thought, oh, my goodness. Okay. She has that courage, and that's awesome. I know that she's probably a better person than me, so already one of my heroes. Now, that process of integrating the stewardship lessons and making it real in my life, I have found one of the best tools to be the campaign prayer guide. So first of all, if you don't have an annual campaign right now, I would like you to just plan on doing it and make this the key point of your annual stewardship campaign. Make that the apex. Now, what I found in parishes that do that, this tends to be not just the cornerstone, but it's the favorite part. People cheat, they read ahead, they love it, they want to talk about it. Now, if you send me a note, I'll give you a template that you can just download and get your authors, and they'll have a model to replicate. I like 14 days. I like 14 different authors, and it can be fun and interesting. But this is a way to shift from stewardship being a concept to me integrating it in my life, and I've got role models, and I've got scripture to guide it. So living as a steward can become a real thing with a tool like this. Now, when you're working with your committee, I like these questions. There are a bunch of questions in the back of each chapter, but I picked these 3. Why does living as a steward call for courage? That's going to help everybody address where they are personally in their stewardship path. What goes on in the mind of a steward? I like that because it's therapeutic. It's like group therapy to talk to your fellows on the path. And what are ways I can measure my progress? Fortunately, we have a couple metrics. What percent of my income do I give away? How many hours a week do I give away as a volunteer? Those are great ways to bring it to the forefront of people's consciousness. Okay, number 4. This is kind of my favorite part of the whole book, okay? Stewards of the church. Maybe I'm an old-fashioned old fogey, but I like church. I like church buildings. I like stained glass. I like being in a place where 1,000,000 prayers have been offered up. That's the facility. Okay? The community. I'm in love with the idea of the community of church. We care for each other. We're like a tapestry. We are all connected. The church has carried me through some wicked hard times in my life. So how can we be there for the people? Usually it involves a facility, but we're all responsible for the body of the church. We place our gifts at God's service through the church, and that is a key paradigm that we've got to communicate over and over again. The church is the outlet for your giving and volunteering. So a summary of chapter 4, and we've got one more and then we're done. The summary of chapter 4 has these 4 points. Talks about community and stewardship, where we are never alone. No man is an island. Talks about evangelization and stewardship, solidarity and stewardship, and Eucharistic stewardship. So it's great because it kind of lends some nuance and insight into the different ways of looking at caring for God's gifts and passing God's gifts along. I'm kind of a closet evangelist. Friends of mine from childhood don't have a church home, and I talk about it freely among them. I don't know how they can live their life without having a community of faith-filled people to walk through the challenges of life arm in arm. I feel a great sense of togetherness and relief and joy because of that community, and I want to share that with others. Now, for you as a stewardship leader, there are some very specific tools I would like to give you as you consider yourself to be a steward of the church. So for decision-making, I recommend that there be 4 decision-making opportunities every year in your parish. With the advent of SurveyMonkey, it's now free. It takes no time and it's easy. You can get input on, at the end of every year, I recommend, as you're planning ahead, give people the time to reflect on the year that has just passed. Help us look ahead and set priorities for the year ahead. Now, on the left of your screen, you can see Holy Apostles. I love that parish. They did a feasibility study before they did a capital campaign in which they asked everybody's input on how should we proceed. And they discovered that not everything was perfect. People had some complaints. People had some disagreements. But you know what? We would have never discovered that without this feasibility study. It was kind of an X-ray before surgery. It really gave us insight. So we modified our plans and we prioritized according to what we heard, and we were a smashing success in that fundraising campaign. Now, the second, this social connections, you know, I'm 62 years old, so I'm an old fogey. And I remember potlucks as a kid. And you know what? Potlucks are a good idea. Getting people together to break bread, it doesn't cost any money. People like social connecting, and it's great if you can do it in the parish hall, do it right after worship services. It is economical, and it promotes a sense of community. Now, at Holy Trinity, we did a capital campaign, and they had not done much in terms of social connecting in the previous 5 years. So we mounted about 20 different social activities. We had hundreds and hundreds of people involved, and guess what? It was a lot of fun. After the capital campaign was done, where we raised a ton of money in 3-year pledges, annual giving went up as well. And I attribute that to the social connecting. You know, the cost of food was negligible, and the outcome was enormous. Now, the third case study there on the right, volunteering. You know, I don't think I mentioned this before, but Fidelity Fund, more than 12 years ago, did a study in which they analyzed the relationship of volunteering and giving. And what they discovered was active volunteers give more than non-volunteers by a factor of 11. not 11%, but a multiple of 11. So if that's all you do, and you wanted to be a good steward of the church, and you wanted to engage more members, if you could just do this one thing, just by increasing the number of volunteers, you would see an increase in giving. We did this recently in a church in Atlanta, and we had a 50% increase in pledges. That's astonishing. We did it with a different church in Atlanta where we did a capital campaign and we increased volunteering, and they had a 30% increase in volunteering and in giving. I mean, it's astonishing the impact of that one thing. Now, going back to the Gallup polling, 3 levels of participation, just remember, only about 15% of your folks are deeply involved. So you've got to design a thing called episodic volunteer opportunities for your inactive, your less than fully active people. And that means a lot of one and done opportunities, something that might last an hour. Show up on Saturday, 9 to 10 to help fix pews. Show up on Tuesday to be a babysitter. Come on Saturday evening after Mass to serve coffee and donuts. Those episodic volunteer opportunities have an enormous impact. Now, I will give you, we have a service, the stewardship system. It is an encyclopedic, online, web-based service that exists to give parishes resources. And for you to be a successful steward of your church, you really have got to have a year-round stewardship activity. So we will give you stewardship letters, committee guides, weekly bulletin inserts, guides for lay speakers, guides for homilies. We'll give you some ideas on episodic volunteer opportunities, hospitality ministries, feedback events, spiritual formation, how to ask. We'll give you sample letters, how to thank people. And you need to have an annual campaign, so we'll give you everything that you need to do that. For me, I have seen what a single prayer can do to change a person's life. Once I rode a motorcycle across Africa, and I counted a pack of baboons on this cliff up there at the top. And that was my one moment of prayer where I said, "Dear God, what might I do in order that I live?" And God answered my prayer. He gave me instructions on how to hit the horn, the flasher, start skidding, turn sideways, and then from here to 20 yards away, whip it around straight, drop the gear down to first gear, redline the engine, pop the clutch, and do the wheelie through the baboons. Nobody had ever told me to do such a thing before, but it saved my life. A single prayer, a single thing saved my life. It changed me. I am aware of how God can intervene in our lives, and it's up to us as stewards to present those opportunities for prayer and transformation. So as a steward of the church, be bold. Try something new and different. Talk about your own experience among your committee. How have you been healed by those you serve? How do you think about your responsibilities for the larger church? Hopefully we want everybody to have that sense of responsibility. I love the parable of the loaves and fishes because I experience in every capital campaign that we work, all of a sudden we have a large amount of money and annual giving goes up as well. The parable of the loaves and fishes is the most true thing in my experience. All right, now I've got another question. How is this relevant for non-Catholics? Well, first of all, as non-Catholic, thank you for joining us. I think this is very relevant. Now, this comes from the United States Catholic bishops, which that's my church, but I believe the lessons are eternal. Please take this material and implement it. You don't have to say the words Catholic, but I think we as Christians have a heck of a lot more in common than we do not in common. Here's a question from Father Greg. Tell me about how this research works in practical applications. Okay, so let me spend a little bit of time on that. Let me shift gears to the Christian steward, okay? So this is our fifth, and we're about to wrap it up here in just a couple of minutes. This is the fifth section. God's co-workers in imitating Christ. The spiritual person can judge everything, but is not subject to judgment by anyone, but we have the mind of Christ. So St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, his admonition to kind of lift our sights up and to act living out what we have learned from Christ. So we are meant to be an imitation of Christ. So the summary is that life is going to be challenging and difficult, but if we pursue that life based on an imitation of Christ, it's going to be full of intense joy. And that has been my experience in my 30 years in the stewardship world. It has been a pleasure. Now, the things that go on in the mind as living when a person chooses to live that life, it is a reframing experience. It is seeing the world in a brand new light. It leads to insight. I like the word phronesis. That is synonymous. That's a Greek word for one of the four virtues. Courage and justice, of course, are one of the two. There are two of the leading cardinal virtues, and prudence is the third. We think being a prude means being stingy and a scaredy cat, but in fact it means living a life in context of a greater good. So that context of wisdom and thinking ahead in the future is the key. The fourth is moderation, as one would expect, but my favorite is phronesis, that one of context and big picture and thinking of eternity. That comes out a lot in this letter, thinking of the long-range plan for your life and your next life. I love the story of Saul on the road to Damascus, who was struck down and blinded, and eventually the scales fell from her eyes, because that's what happens to people through the stewardship process. They have an aha moment where they get it, and all of a sudden they become a generous person. Now, we can facilitate that. We've got to promote generosity. I love this example on your left there from Holy Apostles. We need to have a stewardship of faith, a stewardship of finances, stewardship of prayer, and stewardship of service. Just to get people thinking, this can be a year-round agenda for all your stewardship activities. We need to celebrate success. We need to let people know, what did your generosity cause? So we're going to celebrate the people that we helped, the institutions that we helped, the souls that were impacted by our generosity. And we need to thank people as well. I'm a big believer in handwritten notes. I believe in instituting a whole bunch of volunteers who can do handwritten notes. I believe in asking your pastor to write a whole lot of handwritten notes. People tend to keep handwritten notes. I do. I've got a stack of them right here next to my desk, and it makes an enormous difference. All right, I have another question here. As a church business administrator, I am overwhelmed by the daily duties of ministry and evangelization. Where does stewardship fit in that? I'm very prejudiced. In my opinion, stewardship should be number one, because it's going to give you more money to operate your ministries, and number two, it's going to give you more volunteers, more people power. I would like to promote stewardship as being the top strata, because it gets a measurable impact, a measurable positive impact to the parish. Now, I got some insight into that when I was at the base of Mount Nyiragongo, and I was on a journey to find silverback gorillas. And I'll never forget what this pygmy, our guide, told me. We were in a swamp back and forth for 3 days. We came to the edge of the swamp. There was a baby in a banana tree right there, and the daddy gorilla came towards us feeling threatened, screaming, beating his chest. And I turned to run back into the swamp, and the pygmy said the most profound thing. He said it in his language, and then my friend Basil interpreted it, and then he said it to me. But what he said was, you must turn and face that which you fear, because it can outrun you. That is really true. We have to gather our courage and face it, and we have to be a champion for stewardship, because if we don't, we're not going to have the resources we need for a fulfilling parish life. The number of needs for ministry are enormous, and somebody's got to step up and generate the funds and the volunteers to make that happen. Now, I'm going to quickly summarize, and then we're going to wrap up. Now, the Appendix 1 is the summary. This is a picture of a distillery. So if we distill this down to 5 big points, point number 1 is the call is all about making a decision. Point number 2 is Jesus' way means discerning God's will. Number 3, living as a steward means we are God's co-collaborators. We are God's boots on the ground. Number 4, being a steward of the church really means caring for this community. And it's not just the facilities, it's the people and the ministries. And we can have a direct impact on growing the health of those ministries. And then number 5, the Christian steward has a new way of looking at life. And if you could facilitate that, you have given an enormous benefit to your constituents. All right, so I'm going to wrap up. Appendix 2 is about stewardship and development, resource manual, goals and methods. And my simple suggestion to you in that 3rd paragraph on your, have some metrics. How did we do last year? What are our goals for the next year? What can we measure? Once you do that and you have a track record over time, I'll give you the resources. You know, our stewardship system, I'll give that to you for free if you start doing Sunday bulletin inserts, monthly newsletters, if you have an annual campaign. Increase volunteerism, connect people socially, involve them in decision-making. Giving will go up, volunteering will go up. I guarantee it. Appendix 3 is all about resources. Lots of tools, books, programs, newsletters, guides, prayers, saints, handbooks, videotapes, human beings, the International Catholic Stewardship Council. Please join that. I'm a member. We are sponsors. I'm a presenter at the conference this year. I love ICSC. It's a fantastic organization. Please join. And there are diocesan materials too. So there's something in this book for you, no matter where you are in the process. You can still use it, even though it was created in 1992. We have taken this, and then we have created a very modern guide. We have created a stewardship system. You can get it by going to our website, church-development.com. I'll give it to you for free. You just have to sign up. It'll give you tools on how to teach stewardship, how to engage people as volunteers, how to build community, how to involve people in shared decision-making, how to facilitate their prayer and discernment process, how to ask for support, how to say those words, and then how to thank them. So you'll have an encyclopedia of materials you can download, modified to fit your parish, and be a success. And I hate to simplify it. This is a lot of complex stuff, but I hate to simplify it, but I love this admonition from Chuck Norris. The key to success is to find out what doesn't work, and then don't do that. You know, we're faced with a huge number of barriers. In the secular world, it's just killing us, but we have got to go forth and do the right thing. So go forth, and God bless you. If we can be a help of you, for you in your parish at Church Development, don't hesitate to contact me. There's my phone number, that's my email address, and that is our website. Thank you so much for joining us today for the review of the Stewardship, a Disciple's Response, the letter from the USCCB. Go forth and God bless. Bye-bye.